Multiple people were injured in a shooting Monday morning at an elementary school in San Bernardino in what officials are describing a murder-suicide.
Cedric entered the classroom armed with a large caliber revolver, opened fire on his wife. She was killed in that exchange. There are 2 students in the classroom that were behind the teacher that were struck by gunfire. One of those children is identified as Jonathan Martinez. He's 8 years old. Tragically, he has passed away.
This is the same San Bernardino that saw a major increase in violence, a 41% increase to be exact from the year before. And a lot of people will take this opportunity to tell you that the answer is more guns because the shooting took place in an elementary school. It's a gun-free zone. And those people are usually paid off directly by the NRA, who have a financial interest in selling you more guns. Or they're people who have been influenced by this rhetoric. The reason I mention this is because we can't even get common sense gun legislation passed in America that American citizens already want. In dozens of polls conducted over the past 20 years, more than 70% of Americans have consistently favored expanding background checks for the purchase of firearms. Just look at the CBS New York Times poll conducted in October of 2015. It found that 92% of all Americans favor background checks on all gun buyers. 87% of all Republicans polled were also in favor. At this point, Americans aren't even exactly divided on this issue. When Senators Joe Manchin and Pat Toomey proposed a bipartisan bill to expand background checks a second time, literally 3 days after the first San Bernardino attacks took place, it must have been a no-brainer for the Senate to pass this amendment. Well, that's not exactly what happened. As a matter of fact, the amendment failed with 48 in favor and 50 opposing votes, receiving fewer votes than it did in 2013, despite the increased public support for stricter regulations. At that point, gun rights advocacy groups had spent more than $645,000 on the Senate since 2011, and with sizable contributions made to every single nay voter with the exception of Mike Crapo and John Boozman. And by the way, those guys are idiots, because if you're gonna sell out your constituents, you might as well get paid for it. And the reaction from the officials on this matter is always the same. Whenever something terrible like this happens, most politicians are usually comfortable praying for the victims affected by gun violence, but then equally comfortable taking contributions from the gun lobby and voting against bills that the overwhelming majority of Americans support. And look, you might still be torn on whether more gun regulations can decrease gun violence in this country, but it should be clear to you that asking people to pray for the victims on Twitter has had no significant impact. Now, this may seem like a story about gun control. It's not. This is a story about a fundamental problem with the nation's policymaking. This is a story about the cancer that's infecting the American body politique. This is a story about money in politics. Now, our current political system is incredibly unbalanced. It's blatantly weighed in favor of moneyed interests over regular citizens. We already know that at this point. This election kind of showed that. And the problem is just getting worse, with more money than ever being spent to influence politics. So I ask you guys to be more aware of what your Congress people are doing. Go to town halls, scream at them, just like you did with the healthcare bill. And maybe, just maybe, they'll listen and go against their wealthy benefactors, go against the financial interests of the gun lobby, and possibly pass the simplest of gun regulation, the simplest of gun control legislation that we all want. As citizens, we all think is stupid that we don't have, like background checks on all gun purchases. It's just insane to me that we can't even arrive at this conclusion together. Yeah. Anyway, don't forget to follow me on Instagram at Hassan D. Piker and on Twitter at Hassan the Hun. And this has been The Breakdown.